I'm sure, with the board of directors there and their top people. So for me to make a complaint to the FBI about the PLF was, I didn't realize, sort of risky. And the FBI called me and said, called me back about it after I sent an email. And I said, I was just wondering if this is fraud, because it sounds like fraud. And then this guy called me back and he said, do you happen to know by chance a lawyer by the name of such and such? And I said, no. He said, and basically they thought that somebody had put me up to it, or that I knew somebody and I was making complaints with somebody like backing me quietly, like in the background. And I said, no, I've never heard of anyone. And then they tried to find out if I had a motive. They said, are you currently dealing or working with the PLF? No, I wasn't, because I actually hadn't had my problem with my lawyer yet. I actually found out about the PLF and reported the PLF thing that I thought was fraud before I ever had to deal with the PLF myself. So, so then they said, have you had any business with the Oregon State Bar or the PLF? And I said, no. And I think that at that time I had tried to, or no, later I did report, I later reported Dick Whittemore to the Oregon State Bar for lying and saying that he had 8 inches of sexually explicit email from me, because I thought that was crossing the line. And it was crossing the line. It wasn't zealous representation. It was misdemeanor conduct, and it was malicious. So he did cross the line in every ethical way, and I asked the Oregon State Bar to look into it. But at the time that I first did brought up the PLF, I hadn't had to deal with them. So that was the extent of my correspondence with the FBI before I met, at least knowing that, like knowing right off the top that they were FBI people I was dealing with. Before I met Raul Buhande and Armando Garza and went out with them. So it was basically, I called one time just saying, this guy looks like James White in my neighborhood. And then the only other thing that I ever called about, that I actually emailed about, was the PLF fraud thing. And then I did send a separate email which had nothing to do with, it didn't have anything to do with anybody else. But after I sent the thing about the PLF, I decided, well, I may as well follow it up with a query about working for the FBI, because I'm interested in possibly working for them as a lawyer. So I sent a quick email just asking what they required, stating I was interested in working with the FBI, and what did they require, and nobody answered that email. So it was definitely sent, and it was received by the Portland FBI, but nobody ever responded to me about that one. So I just dropped it. I didn't bring it up again. I didn't keep writing them. They didn't write back or respond, figured they're busy, and, went about what I was doing. And then I didn't have any contact with anybody until I was meeting someone at this courthouse. So after what happened in my apartment, and after this barbecue, then being asked if I wanted to go to this barbecue at Dylan's house, I was then sitting by the poolside, and there were different people there, and eventually they left, one by one, and then I believe that it was that same night. Actually, I possibly just went home. I think that I just went home on that occasion. And then I believe it was a separate occasion when I was out with Krista Schneider and Ryan, her boyfriend, and someone else that I then met up with Dylan again on just a different occasion. It was definitely a different occasion. So after that barbecue, I went back to my house, And I waited for about a week, and I called my grandmother at one point. I didn't know that there were a retired FBI that lived behind their house. I had no idea. I mean, didn't really know who all the neighbors were. And come to find out, they'd moved in about the time that I met the Mount Angel Abbey monks in Oregon. FBI decided to move in next to my grandparents about the time that I met Krista Schneider, whose dad works for that Department of Justice. So I didn't know that they were living over there, but my grandma said, well, maybe you should call them and ask Rick or Claudia what they think you should do. Because my grandmother also thought, I call her Granny, but she also thought, well, maybe are they even FBI? And I thought, I have no idea. I don't know if they really are or not. And again, I have to say, I am being tortured. And it's started up again while I've been talking. So while I was talking about the forms of torture that were being used, they quit. And then as I began talking about as I started bringing up the PLF and the Oregon State Bar and Portland FBI lawyers, they started doing all the same things to my ear and to my teeth and neck. And I think that I want to add, just so somebody doesn't think that this has anything to do with a cavity, for 2 months, for 2 entire months, the military and aerospace industry, defense industry, quit targeting my ear and my tooth. And they basically quit targeting those areas right after I began uploading CT information that I think they got nervous about. And right after I uploaded some of that and I showed where one of my fillings was in my mouth and a couple other things, they basically did other forms of torture, but they quit torturing me to my teeth, to that filling, and they quit torturing me to my ear for almost 2 months. And I do have a cavity that they blasted into my tooth. It's not because I got decay and the tooth fell out. I was tortured about a year ago, and I could feel it going through my head and to my tooth. And they basically chiseled out a part of my tooth, and then they sent my dad a YouTube clip of a dam having a hole being blasted into it right after they did what they did to my tooth. And I only found out about it that they sent this to my dad because on the same day that they wrapped up what they did to my tooth, which I blogged about. I blogged about the extreme torture that was being done because it was around October 22nd, it was close to my birthday, and a year ago, and they had the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers scheduled to blast out this hole in the dam, the Klondike Dam in Oregon, October 26th. So basically, right after they finished doing what they did to my tooth, they then completed their project with this dam, and then they sent my dad a YouTube clip of it, and my dad has no interest whatsoever in anything like that. So the fact that somebody would send him something like that on the same approximate time that they did this to me was sort of a reinforcement of the U.S. torturing me and then trying to rub it in my family's face, which the United States has done by torturing my son and rubbing it in my face, knowing that I'm powerless to do anything about it. I've witnessed horrible evidences of torture to my son, who's just a child. And this country has had me forced me to be exposed to seeing this happen to my son and be powerless to do anything about it. And they did this at the same time that they tortured me. I've seen them do this to my parents as well. I've seen them torture my parents. I've seen evidence of torture on my parents' backs and things that they tried to hide because they thought possibly things would be worse for them if they didn't try to hide it. And at the same time, they have tortured and brutalized me. They forced my parents to work for the United States and to do their bidding on whatever they tell them to do. And they have kidnapped and used my son for similar forms of military research. And I did put a post on my blog about how the United States has been illegally using me since I was a child. And I at first thought that the first time the United States was doing anything illegal was in 1995 when they put implants, microchip implants, into my body, and then forced me to work for a microchip implant employee, Mary and Carl Del Balzo, who worked for Intel, which is a microchip semiconductor company. And they observed me as the hospital and the United States began experimenting on me with basically telesurgery kinds of things, but it was teletorture. It was basically accessing my body and torturing me from a remote location. And the hospital that did this to me was the Salt Lake City University Hospital. They got a bunch of award money from NASA, the aerospace industry, and from the Department of Defense after they did this to me. In 1995, they came into millions of dollars in grants for telesurgery, to be a telesurgery center, and a telepharmacy center, and they also ended up getting a bunch of money to purchase 15 new properties in large buildings for medical facilities as well. So I had initially thought that possibly the first time that the United States started using me was around that time, but that's not really the case because they've been trying to use me since I was a child. And they forced my parents to allow that since I was a child. And I basically decided to reveal some things about that for the first time ever, just a couple days ago, and it's on my blog. I can talk about that at a different time. But I really feel that what's being done is trying to distract me from what crimes the FBI has committed in having their agents use me and abuse me and triggering migraines while I'm in their company, and then writing me up as crazy because how the FBI later characterized the entire incident was a complete lie. And what they wrote about me was so far-fetched and so completely not true. They committed crimes. The FBI has committed a crime of tampering with a witness testimony, with my testimony. The FBI deliberately altered my testimony. And that is actually a crime. They also tried to intimidate me when I was reporting to federal employees who committed federal crimes, and that's a felony. I haven't been able to get anywhere with the FBI because they have committed crimes. So I think that once my enemies and the people who hated me, once they knew that the FBI was willing to do that to me, that's when they knew that it was over for me. And that was in 2005. They were absolutely, had every assurance at that point that the next step was I was going to be, now that I was discredited, now that I was on the enemy list of the FBI, they had every hope to believe that torturing me, full-blown torture of me next, was not going to make any difference whatsoever to the FBI. In fact, the FBI would encourage it and use it